Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Danielle here again, and in today's video I want to talk specifically about accents. So I've been teaching English to non-native speakers of the language for about 7 years now. Also on top of that I have a master's in sociocultural linguistics. So I have many different ways to think about how important are accents really in the language learning process. I want to talk about this because sometimes I get questions about it from my students and their families. I also know for myself, trying to learn several different languages, that accents can play a big role in not just the learning process, like how you learn, but how you think about yourself learning and your experience of learning a language. So first, I want to say, if you're concerned at all about your accent as you're speaking the other language, at least in the beginning, don't be too worried about it. Because in the beginning, you're just getting used to the sounds in a new language. Your mouth is probably making sounds that it's not used to making. It's going to be hard. There will be an adjustment period. Most people actually go through something that's called a silent period when they're first learning a new language. So they will find it difficult to say anything at all, or they just might not feel ready or comfortable saying anything at all initially. So for the first 3 months, really don't beat yourself up about this, because literally you're just getting your feet wet with it. So then the other thing I want to bring up is, what accent should you choose when you are learning a new language? So I'll talk about this from my experience learning Spanish and a little bit of my experience learning Thai, and then also from my experience teaching people who are not native speakers of English the English language. So pretty much every language has multiple accents. Some of them are easy to understand. In other words, if you grew up speaking English from a certain part of the United States, like I grew up in New Jersey, I don't really have any trouble understanding almost any American accent. There are a few that are really difficult, like some really strong Southern accents are difficult for me. I understand most British accents, but some of them I have to listen really hard to when I listen to speakers with those accents. Scottish accents, if they're thick, I have to have subtitles because I don't understand them. Same with really thick Irish accents. So just know that even within native speakers, we have some difficulty understanding each other when an accent or a dialect is really pronounced and we're not used to hearing that specific accent. And because of this, I suggest to my students that they stick with one accent, teachers with that same accent, for at least the first year. The reason is, if you keep changing teachers and your teachers are from different parts of the world or even from the same country, but in that country the accents and dialects vary widely, it's going to be too hard for you. In the beginning, like I said, you'll probably have that silent period and you're just getting used to these new sounds, this new cadence, this new rhythm. You're getting used to hearing it, and then you're trying to emulate it or mimic it with your own mouth and your tongue and your throat and your lips. There's too much going on to now throw in variations of those sounds. It's just discouraging, to be honest, to say, for example, have a teacher from Los Angeles who might speak with a fairly standard American accent, and then have them suddenly learn from a teacher from Ireland who has a very thick Irish accent. It's just too difficult. However, after the student gets really accustomed to the accent and they feel comfortable speaking with people with that accent, then I would recommend that they branch out and try to talk to the teacher from Ireland and see how they do. the difference is that you want to make sure that as you're learning, you continue to stay motivated. And if things are too difficult for you and there's too much work for you to do, especially in the beginning, especially when you're an adult, this becomes reason to give up. A lot of people just walk away from it. But if you keep it just a bit of a stretch, a bit of a stretch, a bit of a stretch, you'll stick with it because you have an appropriate challenge for where you are, and you're able to most likely meet the challenge, and that will feel good for you. So you will stick with the learning process and you will actually learn the language. But if you take something like a new accent and you give it to a student who's just starting out, the goal is too big. You have to stretch too hard, you can't reach, and it doesn't feel good, and I'm just not gonna try. But on the other hand, if you stay here and everything is too easy, you don't grow, right? So you want to give yourself small steps with the accent. So for example, let's say I were your teacher when you're first starting out. You might want to have me as your teacher for 3 to 6 months. And then as you get really comfortable with me and my accent, I would say, okay, start talking to other people with similar accents to me. So I'm from New Jersey. I might say, talk to somebody else from New Jersey who has a thicker New Jersey accent. See how you do. Most likely what will happen is you will notice right away differences in how we speak, and then you will think, oh, this is a little bit hard, but I figured it out, right? And then you get comfortable with that, and I would say, okay, now talk to somebody with a Philadelphia accent. Now talk to somebody with a New York accent. And you will hear differences, whoa, like, what's that? You'll get used to it. And then you can branch out like that from there. Now, differences in accent aren't totally like geographic distance. We have maps that show certain accent regions within a country, and often what happened with language is that contact between different people in isolation within groups of people created strong accents in a certain area, or made a link from one area to another that's actually pretty far away. So these maps might help you get a better idea of accents that are similar and accents that are more distinct or different. So you don't have to overthink it though. I'll put a link in here so you can see a map of what that looks like or can look like. But generally speaking, start with similar accents first and then branch out from there, so that way you feel comfortable with your learning process and it's actually manageable for you. Now, in terms of how you speak yourself, like I said before, you don't need to overthink it. You're going to have an accent most likely, and that's totally fine. Most native speakers of English are totally used to people having different accents. We expect it. I mean, like, the British Empire colonized so many different parts of the world. Their language then got adapted and modified throughout the years, and so there are tons of people all over the world who are native English speakers who sound totally different from each other. It's completely fine. And now that English is a lingua franca, you've got tons and tons and tons of, actually more people who are speaking the language as a second language. So we're comfortable with it for the most part. The thing to focus on is, can people understand you? If you're understood, your accent is totally fine. If people are having difficulty understanding you, then that's the time that you might want to think about polishing your pronunciation, or maybe working on the rhythm or the cadence of your speech so it sounds like a more familiar sound. It's like listening to a song that is very popular by a certain singer, and then you have another singer or another band that does a cover of that song, and they rework it a bit, and it sounds a little bit different, but you still recognize it as the same song because it still follows the same patterns of that song. That's kind of like what you as a non-native speaker would sound like perhaps to a native speaker. But if you're playing the song and it doesn't sound like the song at all and people don't know what song it is when it really is a popular song, that's when it's like, okay, we got to go back and make sure that we actually am representing the initial or the original song that was being played. Another way you could think of it is like, today I am wearing a white microphone on a dark colored shirt. Does it really matter? No. Do you see that I'm wearing a microphone? Yes, you do. But is it really a problem? No, it's not, because it works completely fine. I could have put on a black microphone today, but I didn't, because it doesn't actually matter, right? It serves the purpose, it functions. What will probably happen as you're learning is in the beginning, in your early year or years of learning and using the language, you might look like the white microphone on the dark shirt. And then over time, as you get more familiar with the language, you will blend in more and your accent will become less pronounced. So if I were to put a black microphone on this shirt, if you looked hard enough, you would see that there is a microphone there, but you probably wouldn't really notice. And if you did, you wouldn't care. And that's kind of the difference that I'm going for here. So overall, it's not something you need to worry too much about. Stick with one accent, at least in the beginning, so you can, get yourself going, and you can start using the language pretty fluidly. And then as you're into a more intermediate level, you can start playing around with different accents to then challenge yourself and give you more exposure to a much more wide variety of the kinds of accents that you'll hear and come into contact with. And that would be an appropriate stretch at that point in time. And then for yourself, again, you don't need to overthink it as long as you're being understood. If you're not understood, that's when you can work specifically on your own speaking, your own pronunciation, and mimicking the cadence of the language. So it sounds more like a familiar song that we're used to and not something we've never heard before. So I hope that was helpful for you all. If you liked this video and you like things like this, tips like this, please give a thumbs up. If you have any questions for me, leave them in the comments, and then of course you can subscribe to get more tips and other kinds of videos that I will be making, all all on the topics of language and culture. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.